Hey everyone, so I have this Cupressus bonsai on a rock. I planted it there a year ago, it's pretty solid there now. And you can clearly see that this is a work in process. There's still a very obvious tie-down wire, and you can also see some aluminum mesh on the backside holding the whole root ball together on the stone. But it has been left to grow for a year. That means no trimming at all during the last year since the repotting onto the stone. The branches of this tree have never been styled before, and right now they are very elongated. I'm gonna style this tree now because it's so vigorous and I don't want to lose the foliage close to the trunk. I'm starting out by creating just a tiny shari. That's a little Deadwood feature on the trunk. I'm really gonna keep this small because I'm gonna do some heavy bending today, but I'm just going to start it now because later on it will be the innermost visible layer of visible Deadwood. Over the next years this shari will be expanded bit by bit. I always sharpen the blade before I do these kinds of actions and then use some alcohol for disinfection. I press the knife down firmly. This way I can remove all the bark in one clean cut and that'll heal more easily. The remnants of dead branches are turned into Deadwood features, which are called jins. This is achieved by splitting the top of the Deadwood piece and then grabbing some strands of Deadwood with your pliers. After that they are pulled back to the base of the Deadwood and then finally ripped off. Through this application the natural grain of the Deadwood is exposed. There are a lot of Deadwood remnants on this tree, so I'll have to repeat this process a couple of times. I'm not applying any lime sulfur to preserve the Deadwood for now, because I actually wanted to age a little more before that. I'm also not going to remove any bark as you would on a juniper, although cypresses and junipers look alike and are from the same family. But with this cypress, especially since it's placed on a rock, I want to go for a more natural form instead of a more formalized, stylized form as you would see on a lot of Japanese junipers, and a big part of that is keeping the original bark. The next part of the cleaning process is removing dead branches and elongated or weak growth. This really frees up some of the branch structure and lets you get a better image of the tree, which is very important for the later styling. Now that the cleaning of the tree is completed, I'll start the wiring process. Specifically the wiring of the primary structure, which is primary branches. I'm making sure that the wire is in good contact with the wood. This secures the wire firmly to the branch and makes it possible to bend it more drastically. Then I'm actually adding some bends. I always make sure to go with the direction that the wire is spiraling towards. This way a lot of pressure is taking off the tissue and therefore breaking of the tissue is prevented. By the way, I'm using aluminum wire here. If I recall correctly, I'm using 3mm wire for the larger branches and 2mm wire for the smaller branches on this part of the tree. I always make sure that the wire is thick enough to bend the branch. A too small wire will not be able to give you the results that you need and will ultimately become a loss of wire. And I want to mention real quick that professionals will always give you the advice of using copper wire on conifers. Now personally I also like to use copper wire whenever I have it, but this is quite the large tree and at the time I didn't have enough copper wire on hand, so I just used aluminum. It works fine, it just doesn't look as good, but on the other hand it's cheaper. If you're a beginner at bonsai, I highly recommend that you stick to aluminum for a while longer and practice your skills, and once you do, go over to using copper wire. The foliage tips are greening right now, so it's the perfect time to work on the tree. The wiring process is always started on the lower branches and then you gradually work your way up the tree. So now I'm applying structural wire to the next higher branches. These are a little thicker than the ones below, which isn't ideal but can be worked with. Since they're bigger, I'm also using a bigger size of wire. This is 4.5mm aluminum wire. I make sure to wire in a 55 to 60 degree angle, keep good contact with the branch, and space the wire evenly. Whenever I find a big branch that I decide won't be used in the design, I do not hesitate to cut it off. Most of the time I'll leave myself a little stub for some deadwood though. Now you will find that a lot of professionals strictly separate between wiring the primary structure and the secondary or tertiary, meaning that first they'll go through the entire tree, setting only the primary structure, and once the whole primary structure is wired and bent, they come back and do detail wiring. Now I like to adhere to that rule as much as I can, but sometimes I find it helpful to add some secondary wire here and there, just to position a couple of bigger branches because it helps me visualize a design. The tree ended up looking completely different in some areas of the tree than what I had first imagined, and I find this to be the result of just looking at certain areas of the tree again and again, always making sure to not make decisions based on my own bias, meaning what I visualize the tree to be, and rather repeatedly keep looking at certain areas of the tree and then trying to make decisions for this tree that are bringing out the most potential the tree has to offer. I find this to be a very rewarding exploratory process, and I'm constantly surprised by the possibilities that are opening up while I'm working on the tree. Obviously, as with every craft, this is something that you just gotta practice and you'll get better at it. If you have any questions about the process, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments, and I'll make sure to answer any questions to the best of my ability. Now at this point you can see, working my way up from the bottom of the tree to the top, the tree's really taking shape. Another thing I always do is when I flatten out the pads, I always clean the bottom needles so they don't grow downwards, because that'll just drain energy from the tree and those needles won't be kept in the design in the long term. In terms of how I'm designing the tree, I always make sure to imagine the elements at play for this particular tree. In this case, it's a solitary tree on the rock, so there are no other trees around in the vicinity, so light can penetrate every area of the canopy, wind can flow through the branch structure freely, and the tree can freely grow in all directions. All of these factors have to be considered and expressed in the design. Contrary to a traditional coniferous bonsai design, where all or most branches will just grow downwards, this tree has no competition, so I think it makes more sense to have a more airy, open, in parts upward growing canopy. This also better imitates the natural growth habit of a cypress, and is therefore a better natural representation of a real cypress in nature. When styling the canopy of the tree, it's important to lay all the branches on the side, just as I would have done with any branches below. I do this because a straight upward growing young branch stands in direct contrast to the age we're trying to convey when doing bonsai. Overall, I'm very pleased with how the tree turned out. As you can see, the canopy is wide and expanding and not just triangular. The tree already has prominent deadwood features that will be expanded in the future. For the rest of the year, it'll be allowed to recover, it'll be fertilized very heavily at some point, and then next year I'll start the refinement. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something. If you have anything to say or to ask, comment down below. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and please let me know if you want me to make more long form content. Peace.